Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert. I'm Director of Service in Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and welcome to this event during the first Dublin Climate Action Week. And we hope it's the first of many. There's over 70 events on this week, so I hope you get to participate in others, and maybe you have already. So this event is really centered around climate action and how that relates to mobility, or active travel, and livability. And really what we're looking at is how do we try and create, climate resilient places and communities in Ireland, and what can we learn from what's happened already in Ireland, what's about to happen soon, and what is happening elsewhere in Europe and around the world. So I'm delighted that we have a range of speakers here today to sort of shine a light on these areas, and it's very varied. So we have Conor Garrity, who's the Senior Engineer in Active Travel in Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. Conor is Lead Designer on Active Travel projects, and I suppose he's best known as the Lead Designer for the Coastal Mobility Route, which was constructed last year. We have Mariana Weinreich, who's from Ramboll and is their Market Manager. Mariana is also the Chair of the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. We have Dr. Sarah Rock, who's the Chair of Urban Regeneration Masters at TU Dublin, and is also a lecturer in Transport and Urban Design. And we also then have Jakob Kurek, who's a partner at Henning Larsen Architects, world famous architects based in Denmark, and he specializes in international projects. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Conor, and we will have a series of short presentations from each of the speakers. And at the end of that, we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of the issues. You'll have an opportunity to put questions. So feel free to put questions as the presentations progress, and we'll put the questions to the participants at the end and maybe just have a general discussion. So Conor, over to you.
Thanks, Robert, and good morning, everybody. I'll assume everybody can see my screen okay, unless I hear otherwise. So as Robert said, I'm Senior Engineer for Active Travel in DLR, and my talk this morning is going to cover DLR's response to COVID that was carried out in 2020, and then how it relates to mobility patterns, but also livability within the county. When we were preparing projects as a response to COVID, it required a totally different approach to project delivery, because the traditional or more normal approach where you would prepare a design, go for public consultation, was quite a lengthy process. And in the time frame that we had to respond, we didn't have the same luxury of time that we would have had normally. And what we did was we came up with this adaptive build model where we prepare a design, very, very intense public engagement with the stakeholders most affected. We built it using rapid build and kind of flexible materials, and then went through an iterative process where we, if there were issues, we dealt with them, we continued to engage, we changed things, and we kept going on that kind of circular motion until we got the project as close to perfect as we could. And these projects that we delivered provided social distancing space, which was for health and safety reasons in COVID, but it also allowed for queuing space for businesses, and in some cases seating that allowed them to reopen when they wouldn't have otherwise been able to return to business post lockdown. So I've just provided a small timeline across the top, and I'm just going to run through some of the projects that we did. So the first one up is Blackrock Village, excuse me, and what we did was we created a one-way system that allowed the introduction of a contraflow cycle track, landscaping, seating, and I think you can see from the pictures the before and after is vastly different. And an important point to note is that the team that was assembled to prepare all of these projects was multidisciplinary, so across all spectrums within the council. And I think that really shows in the schemes that have been developed. And I'm always particularly struck by the seating that's been provided in Blackrock and how it's been managed to catch the light that's coming between the gap in the buildings. And certainly that didn't come from the engineering disciplines, but it does come from the architectural side of things. Next up is the coastal mobility route, and this is a 4.5 kilometre route that stretches all the way along the coastline in Dún Laoghaire. So 3.6 kilometres of it is fully segregated, similar to what's shown on the right-hand side of that picture. And it was developed in-house by DLR over approximately 3 weeks and deployed over 5 weeks. So that's at a rate of about 200 metres a day. And I'm very proud to say that in the first year we recorded over 2 million walking and cycling trips. And to give that some context, that's 5,500 trips per day. So you could imagine if you required 5,500 parking spaces, or the equivalent of 30 kilometers of cars queuing, and that has a significant positive impact on the area. Glasstool Village was one of the more modest schemes that we developed, but it shows how the simple reallocation of a number of parking bays. And what's important to note here is that some of the businesses provided their own street furniture and put their own stamp on the area, but that the very subtle and small changes in terms of like 20 square meters can make a big difference to the impact on a village. Carysford Avenue in Blackrock again is just short of a kilometre long, and over 3 weeks in August we provided a fully segregated cycle route all the way along Carysford Avenue. And although you can't see it in this photograph, on the right hand side is Carysford National School, and we've worked very successfully with them down through the years to provide infrastructure to support the great work that they're doing in the school in terms of mobility. And they boast more than 90% of all trips to the school are either by walking, cycling, or on the bus. And it's a great example of how the built infrastructure can support people working hard in local schools. Dundrum Main Street was in October 2020, and it was similar to Blackrock, although on quite a bigger scale, where we again put in a one-way system, contraflow facilities for cyclists that were segregated, and then large areas of public realm with seating and planting. Finally, towards the end of last year was Dalkey Town, and the photograph on the left is an area we call the square about, which was a square. It acts as a roundabout, and on most sides of it had 2 lanes circulating, and that was retrofitted to provide this large public realm space with seating, and it's a really kind of little hotspot within the town. And part of that project then was all along the main street, where we narrowed it and provided seating and planting. So I appreciate that was a very, very quick run through of some of the projects. And when I was preparing for this presentation, it struck me, I suppose, the scale and pace of change that was installed in Dún Laoghaire last year. And you don't maybe appreciate it at the time when you're in the middle of it, but when you take a step back, you can see that, and the picture shows here that the red line is the coastal mobility route, and the blue dots are the different village schemes along the way. And I've heard this described as kind of the string of pearls, and I think I really like that analogy, where it's the core of, and the mobility element of it is the string. It's the coastal route, but it's only providing options for people to get to the pearls, and neither stands on its own. So you require that mobility in combination with livable spaces to really change people's patterns, and I think it's had a really positive impact in the area. Just to talk a little bit about active school travel, so this was designed as a quick build scheme in the same fashion as the other routes or the other projects, and it was to try and create 3 routes that total 20 kilometers in the county, using as little new infrastructure as possible, and it connected over 65 schools. And the idea was that with less than 2.5 kilometers of new cycle facilities, we could create these 3 routes. And just to show you where that's at in the context, we proposed it originally back in September. It is sort of in the middle of the block on the left. And at the time, and with the benefit of hindsight, it was probably more ambitious than people could maybe take at the time. But we got a lot of feedback that it needed to have periods of public consultation, and we needed to engage with people across the county, which we agreed to do. But just to show you, I suppose, over the last 13 months, we're still engaging with the public on the project. And despite, like, we have had very positive engagement where we've been able to bring people along, but you can see the time taken to deliver more traditional public engagements on projects. And I suppose as my last slide, and maybe to spark a bit of discussion, if we're trying to respond to a climate emergency, are we required to take more of an approach that we did in COVID? Or if we fall back into the same patterns of public engagement for years on end, are we really going to deliver the change that's required to react to a climate emergency? And that's all the slides that I have. So I'll hand you over to Mariana, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Connor. I will now share my screen, and hopefully you all see it. final
Sorry,
words,
Anna.
and that's
Sorry, your sound just had gone funny there for a second, but I think you're back now.
okay. Am I back?
Perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I'll try and pick it up where you left it off with COVID, and kind of take the European perspectives and highlight a little bit of what has been happening around Europe in relation to COVID and active travel. And climate change. Actually, transport accounts for about 1/3 of the CO2 emissions. And unlike other sectors, CO2 emissions from transport is actually growing instead of decreasing. And we're talking a lot about electrification of transport and cars. And it is one measure that we can use to decarbonize transport, but it is not enough. And it also does not address other problems that transport and cars are causing, such as congestion and health issues. So that's why we need to have also active travel. I was lucky to go to the VeloCity conference in Lisbon last week, and everybody from Frans Timmermans from the European Commission to mayors around Europe, to planners, to researchers, there was one big conclusion during that week. There is no conceivable way to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the European Green Deal goals, or climate neutral cities without significantly more cycling and also walking, meaning active travel. And cycling has been having a comeback as an urban mode of transport the last 10 years. But with the COVID pandemic, it has really boosted both the attention, the political will for change and funding, as well as actual action, as Connor also just showed. We have seen almost 1.7 billion euros being allocated for cycling measures since the pandemic started. It has resulted in about 1,500 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure and a total of almost 2,600 kilometers have been planned so far. And this is the European Cyclist Federation that are measuring or collecting all the data around these measures. Bike lanes, they have been installed from Berlin to Bogota, temporary, but also in a way that they could be adapted and redesigned to more permanent solutions. And what it also showed was that when you build it, people actually come and use it to a great extent. What we've also seen is a lot of traffic calming projects, making sure that the speed of the cars is slower and creating more room for other purposes, as Connor also exemplified. When it comes to speed, we are right now seeing that big cities are now really looking at speed as a measure to slow traffic down and make it safer to walk and cycle. Back in January, Brussels created Europe's biggest 30-kilometer-per-hour zone, making that the default speed limit in the city. And it was just published last week that even just now it has resulted in a 25% decrease in serious injuries, a 50% reduction in noise pollution, and an explosion in the number of cyclists. And actually also last week, Paris was now the new city on the block to introduce a big 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limit, and now has the biggest area with a 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. What we're also seeing, also as Connor showed, is the fact that public realm and space is being redistributed. Space is taken away from car traffic and given to outdoor seating, to walking and to cycling. And of course, this was also linked to the pandemic and the need for more social distancing, but it also in many cities was linked to the fact that it also boost the local shops, the local cafes and restaurants that really needed an economic boost after the pandemic. So this is really measures that are good for the local businesses and for the local citizens. What we're also seeing, and that's also linked to climate change, is that with the heater, we get more heat in cities. It becomes warmer and warmer. So planting trees and cooling down streets has become a new thing. And I've seen some results from, for instance, Vienna, saying that they could actually lower the temperature in a street by 5 degrees by adding trees. And in relations to walking and cycling as a mode of transport, not only is it good for climate change, it's also good for walking and cycling as it provides shade and thus is something that helps with the argument in some cities that you cannot cycle because it's too hot. But in the Nordic, we cycle because it's even though it's cold. So it's more a mental state of mind, but it is something that helps here also. So in conclusion, I would just say that active travel and cycling really has a big positive impact on everything related to sustainability, the whole triple bottom line, better land use, less emission, less noise. We get more livable spaces, more personal safety, more equality, better traffic safety, better public health, better accessibility, more efficient transport, and we cater for climate adaptation. So it really is something that to engage in and support, because active travel is something that is a core in creating livable cities. So that was it from me. So I would like to hand over to Sarah Brock from TU Dublin. Your screen is hopefully soon yours, Sarah. We see the screen, Sarah, but not you or hear you. Are you there, Sarah?
There's always one presentation that doesn't work. I think I'm on, am I?
Yeah, you just need to put your video on, and the slides were fine. It was just you.
It was me.
Now we see you and hear you. Take it away, Sarah.
Now we have the full picture. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for so much inspiration there in your presentation. It was great to see. I just want to share a few thoughts and reflections on the importance of evaluative research and its role in climate action, mobility, and livability. And of course, now my presentation is not going to move. Unlucky for some, huh? Okay, going to. Okay, has it moved on?
Looks like it has, Sarah. Yeah, we can see it.
Finally. So as we heard from Conor earlier, from about mid-2020 on, Laoghaire-Rathdown undertook a series of mobility and public realm projects as a response to COVID-19 and the various reopening phases. Just a reminder of some of the images there on the left-hand side from Blackrock Main Street and Dundrum Main Street. And on the right-hand side, of course, the Coastal Mobility Route and Dalkey Village. Before COVID, it was quite unusual to find projects like this in Ireland. Now, there's a number of characteristics, we'll come back to them in a few minutes, but of course, one of them is the fast implementation. And this has really given us, in the education and research sector, a real opportunity to evaluate and learn. And so for the last year, we've been working in partnership with Dún Laoghaire to evaluate and assess how these projects are going. And we're due to publish our early or interim findings in the coming weeks on that. So first we might take a step back and ask, what is evaluative research and why it is important? So this is really a systematic assessment of a program or a project against its goals. So does it set out what it intended to achieve? Now this is important, obviously, public money is being spent, but we have to remember there's a much bigger picture. And we're feeding into the advancement of knowledge and progress for society and the planet. We're talking about exploration and innovation, and we're challenging current ways of looking at problems and developing new ideas. The importance of the COVID context is really hard to underestimate, because this crisis called for fast action, and Conor talked about that earlier. And what it allowed for is experimentation and innovation that is really often not that typical of the public sector, and an opportunity, of course, to review the effectiveness of these projects. As part of our research, we interviewed a number of people, including some councillors from Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. And I have to say, this is one of my favourite quotes from those interviews. It said, "COVID has thrown a spanner in the works, but has given everything a rocket as well." So the experimental lesson of COVID is useful, a number of reasons. We can pilot and evaluate small scale and relatively small budget interventions that have the potential to make a big difference. What you measure in evaluation, of course, is important. We'll come back to that, as is understanding that usage and travel patterns and behaviours can change over time. Just a few images from the bottom. We see the road space reallocation in Blackrock. So what does that mean? Taking some of the carriageway formerly dedicated to vehicles and reapportioning it back to more public uses like public space. There's the filtered permeability scheme in Grange Gorman, a very low cost scheme that tested the impacts of what it would look like if you limited vehicles going through but allowed pedestrian and cyclists. And now that is actually being, at the moment, that's under construction to be made more permanent. And then there's time-based street closures, such as happening in Capel Street, where, say at weekends or evenings, you might close the street off to vehicles and allow more public uses. You've heard the term COVID mobility, I'm sure, and that's not just about transport issues and catering for alternatives to the private car at a time when public transport capacity was reduced. It's also critically, and probably why it's so successful, about the experience, comfort and usability of public space. It's about giving public space back to people. It's about the private sector, the businesses and the traders working together with the public sector, in this case the council and the State Transport Agency, the NTA, to deliver a workable plan that can be implemented fast. And then there's the role of the researcher to see what the impacts are on businesses, local community, the environment through COVID. And of course, earlier we said, is this different to normal? And unfortunately, it is. Up to now, we've tended to work in our silos, and siloed thinking leads to narrow thinking. Whether it's the public sector, the private sector, politicians, whether it's planners, architects or engineers, when you look at something from only one angle, you only address needs or perceived needs from one perspective. And of course, what we learned from COVID is that we've got to move towards more multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary partnership approaches. In transport, the classic silo thinking is through the windshield of a car. So those that make the decisions, those who are planning for our public spaces and our roads and streets, are actually often people who drive and maybe only drive, and that is kind of called looking through the windshield. So really it's who's not in the room there, who's not contributing to decisions, and also what we measure has been an indicator of success. Here is a road that runs through perhaps the heart of Blackrock Village in the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown area. And you know, traditionally we would have said what makes this this particular use of public space, because that's what it is, it's a use of public space, successful, would have been the number of cars that pass through a junction at each light sequence, how fast it is for somebody who's driving to get from A to B. But what this doesn't measure is also as equally important. Here outlined in red, we see a woman with a pram standing in the middle of the road. You can see what it's like in the middle of the road on the left-hand side to try and cross. What about the metric of what it's like for her and the impact on her day? What about the reduction in the number of children walking to school, especially independently, because of a road like this? The anxiety and comfort levels of walkers crossing, walker and cycle exposure to air pollution, and then the effects of noise on the stress levels and the health of people living adjacent to these sorts of roads. Now, there's another silo, and that's traditionally been the academic silo, you know, where academics can be in their own sort of little ivory tower and aren't contributing to the wider debate on these sort of issues. But evaluative research really tries to change that. It's about affecting change in the industry. It's about working with the public and private sector, learning from what worked well, what didn't, and it's about influencing policy and practice to better our society and environment through research, monitoring and evaluation. And just as a very last slide of inspiration, of hope, maybe just to finish up, these are just two recent photos I took from the Laoghaire-Rathdown area. Conor mentioned actually the school in Carysford that had benefited from recent sort of child-friendly cycle lanes. That has led to a huge increase in the number of children walking and cycling to that school. And this is a little image I took when I was out in Dunleary myself last Friday evening for a bite to eat, and these 4 women passed me by looking like they're perhaps heading on a night out, and you know, 3 on their bike and the 4th actually in the cargo bike. So I thought that's a real nice sort of sign of culture change. Thank you very much. I will pass you on to Jakob.
You can hear me now?
Yes, Jakob, we can hear you.
Okay, can you see my screen as well?
Yes, we just have the slider on the right-hand side. It's
Yeah, I will just move that one down.
perfect. Yep, that looks good.
Is it okay now? Is it okay
Perfect,
now?
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I just need to check. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. I will continue the talk here, but also continue by showing an image of bicycles. It seems like we are very happy about bicycles during this talk this morning here. But I'm also showing an image of very happy people, presumably some of the happiest citizens in the world, the Copenhageners, and enjoying the public realm, the livability of cities. So my talk will focus a little bit more about the livability in the public realm as such, but also the resiliency that we're seeing at the moment with the not only in terms of pandemic, but also the global warming and so on. I mean, we here in Copenhagen, for us, you can see bicycling is a normal way of commuting. It's not a sport where you have to wear a lycra from top to bottom, but we also really like to meet and socialize and engage, share knowledge and so on within the public realm. And it doesn't really matter whether we are just conquering spaces within the public realm or we are swimming in our inner harbor. So this kind of transformation is something that is going on in Denmark and in Copenhagen in particular for the last 10 to 15 years, where we're cleaning up, changing pavements, changing roads, emphasizing green space and so on. And actually it turns out during the COVID that these public spaces has been used 3 to 4 times more compared to normal. You wonder where these people have gone if there wouldn't have been any public spaces. Let's see. Yeah, but basically, I mean, the sun is not always shining also in Copenhagen. So basically, this is the days that we are designing for as architects here at Henning Larsen, because 80% of our time, this is the terms and conditions. So if we can make a lively and active public realm these days, when there are days like this, then I'm sure it's going to work also when it's a nice and sunny day. And at the same time, we're also acknowledging, I mean, around the world that the rain doesn't come normally; it comes more heavily, and I mean, and really change the perspective of cities and also you know, the public realm and so on. And it's probably unfortunately going to stay like this for at least for a period of time. And that also means, like, for a long time we have been kind of seeing this as a problem, but actually kind of how we are looking at it now and how we're seeing that from Copenhagen, Denmark and beyond, but also us as architects and engineers, is we see it, why not flip it upside down and see it as a potential, but also a potential resource, because it's probably going to come here to stay. And also you can say, how do we create a public realm that works both when we have the water and when we don't have the water coming in and out? We cannot duct it all. Let's get the water out and use it as an active element, and then start to design for it and start to hide it away and not use it, and that, because then it really becomes a problem. And that also means when we are designing master plans, public realms and urban designs across the world, we are using a lot of knowledge into how to do that, but also to foresee, I mean, the 100-year wave, the 1,000-year waves, and so on. How can we create spaces that are active, that almost are everyone's land, that doesn't become a no man's land? And by different ways of means of design, we believe here, when we are doing this master plan up in Belfast, that we can extend the summer by 6 weeks. And then, I mean, when we talk to people up there, how on earth are you going to do that? We have the most rubbish weather here. It's windy, it's rainy, and look at our public realm and so on. We always go out on the outskirts, and this is where the joy and this is where the good weather is. So let's imagine if we can bring the good weather, the good public realm back into Belfast and so on. But then you can say architects, they tend to kind of talk through their heart and sort of so on. But what is it actually that they can do? Is it only, I mean, warm speeches and talks and so on? And having worked in New York and the US for some years now, there's a saying from Michael Bloomberg here: "In God we trust, but everyone else brings data." So of course we also bring data to our projects, and here you can see in Belfast. So when we're saying that we can extend the summer by 6 weeks, it means that we can create an extended period of the summer where the perceived temperature of being able to sit outside without wearing a jacket or a coat or anything is actually possible. And it's simply by understanding the local constraints and turning that into an opportunity, and understanding the sun and the wind, noise and all this kind of thing, and then run different types of simulations, so the data becomes, you can say, a fundament or the starting point of the design as such. And that enables us actually to create spaces that are livable, that be actionable, where we can live and breathe, and we can share, talking to our neighbors and things like that. Coming to a project in Denmark, a little bit outside on the edge of Copenhagen here, we have kind of created a master plan working on here, where we somehow said, why is it that we keep continuing doing the city block, as you see in the middle? What if, when we're looking into the water and the resiliency and so on, instead of hiding the water, when we look back into the old days, our villages, they were surrounded by the water pond that also we used for the fire trucks and so on. Could we somehow create a new type of city, urban design that was more based upon the knowledge and experience 1500 years ago, combining that to a city block, but seeing it more as a cluster of communities, and then not only scaling it down, but using the water as a connecting element in that way. And that actually turned out that we were creating a kind of a manifesto of the qualities or the design statements that we would like to achieve on this master plan, but also because of it's the uniqueness of this green recreational meadow area in the heart of Copenhagen, that we wouldn't destroy, we wouldn't eliminate it, but also rethink about how can we design something that lasts for 100 years, and we don't have to look into flood issues and things like that. And we are more driven by the pedestrians rather than the cars. We are reinforcing the bicycle routes and so on. But actually, for mostly, we would like to be a visitor in the nature. We would like to acknowledge, respect, and reinforce the whole biodiversity, but also the wildlife as such. So we would like to be seen more as a visitor in the nature that celebrates and reinforces the recreational life, the softscape, the bird lives, and all these kind of the nesting and things like that. And of course, we've done these similar simulations as we have done in Belfast. But basically, if you look at the diagram to the left, there was some lakes, there was some water streams running from the north, we had the wetlands, and then we kind of utilized that and combined that into creating the three communities that are surrounded by low points that also then becomes where we collect the water when the water comes and the heavy rainfalls and so on during the seasons, and also use it as a part of the soil strategy and the rainwater management system. So somehow we are creating a wider ecosystem where we on top become the visitor as such. We were actually spending also quite a lot of time camping out in the area and really understand where's the animals, where do they meet, where do they engage and socialize, and where do they hide, where do they sunbathe, and where do they go where it's dry, where do they go when it's wet, and things like that. Somehow contribute to the nature and to the fauna that was in that area. So in that sense, you can say it's for our perspective, it's all a matter of giving back and celebrating the qualities that you have within there, and then make sure whatever you add something on top or to the side or into the mix of that, no matter how you want to call it, it's important that we take care of the things or the elements that was there already, but reinforce them and celebrate them and make that even stronger. So we're creating the habitats, the connections, not only for the people, but also for the beautiful animals and for the seeds and so on that was there already. So let's think carefully before we draw and think about the climate. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Jakob. If you wouldn't mind just on sharing your screen, please.
Yes, I'll try to do that.
Okay.
How do I do that? That's the question. Okay, yeah.
So
now
Jakob, while you're doing that,
now it should be okay,
yes.
right?
Okay, yeah, everybody's back. So thank you, everybody. And I think in many ways that was a whistle-stop tour. And I really appreciate the fact that you stayed within the time constraints. We were trying to obviously keep them relatively short, but try and get in as much as we can so that we could have a little bit more time at the discussion. So we've had quite a few questions have come in there. First up, why do we think it took, and I guess I'd leave it open to everyone, there's a lot of changes that have taken place in the last 18 months. Why do we think it took a global pandemic and probably one of the worst health crises in history to bring about these changes?
I can maybe start off to that, contribute to that, Robert, if you'd like. I think maybe in Ireland, COVID really brought into sharp focus how inadequate our public spaces were. You know, when you were limited to 2 kilometers and you had maybe no public space within that 2 kilometers, maybe there was no interconnected street system that you could walk to. It really brought into focus how there's so much of our environment that was inadequate and needed to be dealt with. So I think when plans came along, that actually looked at improving our public spaces as well as transport. So it was really about the place and the movement function. I think a lot of people really got behind it. So in the Irish context, that's what I would say what was the key reason. Maybe there's some other context.
Thanks, Sarah. Mariana, yeah, please.
Can I add something on a more, I work with behavior change, and in behavior change, what makes people actually change behavior is big changes in our life, moving or starting a new job or starting school from kindergarten. Those big changes in our life, we are open to changes in general. And I think that this pandemic was a global change in our everyday lives. So because everything was different, we were open to changes also in the way we look at public spaces and transport. So it created this kind of sandbox where cities could try out different things and people could actually experience them. Because that's another thing in behavior change. It can be hard to imagine what it could look like if we changed mode of transport. And for instance, cycling, it's not something you can just think about. You need to try it in order to experience how it works for you, what it does for you physically, mentally, commuting, everything. So it created this space for change, I think.
Okay, and thanks for that, Marianne. Jakob, just for yourself, I mean, we've talked, probably Mariana and Sarah talked about mobility, but I'm really interested in this idea how we've sort of re-engaged with public space and our local areas. And I wonder, has that been a factor during COVID, with lockdowns that have taken place, we were restricted in our movements. Did we reconnect with our local communities, and is that a factor in the changes that we're seeing?
I think we have definitely connected with our local community during COVID. I actually think there was a tendency before COVID because everything was so global, and that I think a human reaction to that is that when you come back from your business trips, your holidays, and so you would like to engage with your local community. So I actually think there was a trend going on already of being hyper local and take part of the local communities and things like that. But the fact that COVID came in, that have only speeded up that mindset, if you like. And also I think in some parts of the world it has almost saved them through COVID, that they actually had that local community. So if it hadn't started, it had definitely started during COVID. And then I think some cities where space has been a scarce resource, I think they have also acknowledged now that we cannot afford to have leftover spaces or spaces left for asphalt or for cars a limited time of a day or for my daily rhythms. That we need to think more carefully how we use our spaces, but also the leftovers and how we can more multi-purpose use and program the spaces, because we all need to have a breathing space. And I don't think, unfortunately, that hopefully the COVID is done, or we have hit the peak of it. Let's see what happens to the autumn. But I think the side effects of that is definitely not over yet. So I think now the cities, they have a really good excuse of doing things that they have not been able to do before, or maybe have not been able to get the funding for, and so on. If you are firm, this is the best time to do a change management plan, because now we have an excuse. I hope the same goes for the cities and the regions and the countries, that public realm, public space, and good quality of that is something we need. Otherwise, I mean, the wellness and the social life is under a threat, you could say, almost, right?
Okay, thanks, Jakob. Yeah, very interesting. I think maybe there's more to play out on that. Just some questions coming in here around the theme of active travel infrastructure and how difficult it is to implement it. And it's just interesting. I was looking at something yesterday evening, and that around the turn of the century, 1900, Los Angeles and Southern California had a cycle share of 20% and some of the best infrastructure in the world. And I guess any of you who've been to Los Angeles will kind of find that very odd when you look at it being probably the most car-centered place in the world. And it made me think about the idea, well, we don't have a cycling tradition here. That's what we're often told in different countries when we're trying to introduce new infrastructure. And indeed, I'm sure that was said in Denmark and the Netherlands back in 30, 40 years ago. So just on that, why do you think it's so difficult to provide safe cycling facilities in some countries, including in our own country? And why do you think it's controversial, and why it meets resistance? And I'll leave it open to everyone, but I'd be particularly interested in Mariana and Jakob and your experience in the countries you've worked in, particularly in Denmark. But I might go to Sarah first on that, because I think Sarah would have a good handle on the Irish setting. Sarah, what's your view on that?
Well, in Ireland, and I know Denmark and Holland, and had the same problems back in the 70s. We just continued to provide for cars. So maybe when the oil crisis, hit in the 70s, different countries began to go different ways. We were at a very unique time in Ireland because we were very poor. Very few people drove, lots and lots of people cycled, so we actually had a great tradition. Lots of people walked. We all lived quite close to where we worked, so we had a very different structure. But then once our economy started to boom, we embraced roads, thinking that roads were progress. So different countries then went different ways. So I guess that's our real challenge now, is that we have given far too much of our public space. It's hard for some people to think that a road is actually a public space, but it is. That's our biggest network. It should be our most accessible network of public space, but we've given too much of it over, and so that's what's so hard to roll back. But I'm sure that there's similar challenges in continental Europe as well. It probably just started a bit earlier than what we have.
Okay, thanks for that, Sarah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I'll open it maybe to Marianne. I know, Marianne, you do a lot of work in this area. Have you a view on that?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, Robert. It used to be that, everybody cycled before World War II. Cycling was big in most cities around the world. But then after World War II, cars were introduced. It was progress. And we saw our cities being redesigned to accommodate cars. And the question was, how many cars can we get into our cities? How many people can we get through our cities? And that was seen as progress. And as Sarah said, in the Netherlands and in Denmark in the 70s, it actually came from the citizens saying, stop taking away all the cycling space, stop building just for cars. And there were demonstrations in Amsterdam, in Copenhagen, in front of City Hall, demanding, more cycling infrastructure. And since the beginning of the 70s, city of Copenhagen and other Danish cities have invested in cycling infrastructure. And it is because it is needed, but it is also show that you can design the city you want. We have designed for cars. We can redesign our cities, and Jakob showed also pictures of it, and build, because we nudge people to drive when we have urban sprawl, when we have big car lanes. Building car lanes is not solving any congestion problems. It just adds to it, because it's not even more people to drive. So we need to have cities where you can live independently of a car and have very good alternatives, because you cannot just take those options away and not provide alternatives. And when you talked about why it can be so confrontational or controversial to talk about cycling, in my experience from working both in Denmark but also international with cycling, I think it is something to do with the mental image that many people have of what a cyclist is. In Denmark, a cyclist is the person that cycles, and you can do it, it's half and half, men and women, it's children, it's business suits, it's very diverse. Whereas in outside Denmark and the Netherlands is often a younger male, often in Lycra, and if that's the only image, then it becomes kind of a block for looking at cycling as something you do in everyday life that everybody can do. So that's why we are talking about normalizing cycling, making it just as normal as taking the car, that you take your bicycle and cycle for everyday trips.
Okay, thanks for that. I might move on. Some people think I talk too much about cycling, so wouldn't want people to get that impression. So this event is about something much wider, and I guess active travel is actually a means to move around. It's a practical, efficient means to move around as part of compact development, I think. A lot of people would accept that. But we brought up a concept today, and it's in the title, livability. Now, it's lovely. It seems kind of a warm, fuzzy term. But what does it mean? And maybe I'll put that question to you, Jakob. Maybe architects are better placed to describe something that's a little bit more woolly rather than engineers. So maybe you give us your view on that.
It's definitely a word that we all like to use and maybe overly use, and maybe it's also, do we actually mean the same thing when we talk about what is livability and what does it mean? I think for us and what we do here in Henning Larsen, it's really about having a focus around the human being, the human comfort and the human well-being in a wider context. The livability in that sense is that it's a place that you want to be. You don't want to go around it. You want to go through it, because this is where the social life and the activities or things are happening, and you don't want to miss that out. It's you can say, we talk a lot about placemaking and creating a destination and things like that. I think we should be careful we're not creating design objects that has been dropped from the moon, but it's actually have a stronger focus on the space between the buildings and the quality and the sequence of how we use that. And that's why I found the example before that with the master plan in Denmark, that it's more a cluster of different communities that have different nuances, different lives and so on. When most of us are going to the old cities in southern Italy and Spain and so on. We keep walking around in these old streets when we go to Rome. Our kids are screaming. You're dying of thirst. Your feet are killing you, but you keep walking. But you can sense around the corner that something else is happening, and you don't want to miss it. That is what you keep going. You keep moving and moving and moving, and you're almost too tired at the end of the day to open the menu to find out what you're gonna eat. I think that is to some degree livability, because you don't want to miss out what's happening around the corner. And then we can talk about economics and investments and bicycles and trees and whatever. But I think this is about the quality of life, that you can sense something about around the corner that you don't want to miss out. That, if I should talk from my heart, this is what livability is.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jakob. And Connor, just on the same question, maybe you're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. I know you've the engineering background. But what's your own view on that, about livability?
I suppose the idea that if you leave your house with your family, you should be able to get to where you want to go without having to rely on a car, or that it should be close enough that you could just walk or cycle. When you get there, you're confident that there's the right facilities for you to just enjoy the space, and that even the journey to your destination is part of your day out. It's not just a car trip to a car park, and that's when it starts. And certainly over the last year, I think very much in Dún Laoghaire that has changed, where people now would prefer to the journey where you can pass through other communities that have had real improvements. I know with my own kids, we do a trip through Honey Park, Coolanore, and then down into Dún Laoghaire, where we pedestrianise the main street, and that takes an entire day. Whereas before it would have taken 10 minutes in the car, we would have parked up, got what we had to get, and come home. So it actually just makes it a more comfortable place to be and to live in and spend time in. And that's quite a woolly response to a question, but it's just being able to enjoy your area. I think people have valued the space more, and because the pace of life has changed as well, there isn't that mad panic that there was before COVID, and people expect to be able to just amble around and enjoy the spaces that we provide for them.
No, thanks, Connor. I think, yeah, go ahead. Who wants to come in there? Yeah, I might just bring in Sarah. Do you want to come in?
Really, just to reinforce what both Jakob and Connor said, I think people know. I think that there's a few key words there, and one of them was well-being, another one's quality of life. another word is, you know, an inclusive place, a place that, you know, everybody is welcome. You know, we often talk about the 8 to the 80-year-old, a place where you know, you can walk independently and feel a sort of sense of freedom, comfort, and that, and people know what that feeling is, or more, that you know when you don't have it. You know when you're in a place that's uncomfortable, in a place where you're holding on to your child's life for, you know, for dear life. And it's getting to the public imagination, you know, what is the feeling, what are the feelings in certain places, what makes me feel uncomfortable and what makes me feel comfortable, what makes me feel welcome, what doesn't make me feel welcome, and then bringing that into a language that, you know, everybody can understand and feed into, to, you know, improve our wider public realm.
Okay. I'm just conscious of time. Jakob, you wanted to, and thanks for that, Sarah. Jakob, did you want to come in with some, just another point?
It's just a very quick reflection, Robert, because somehow I really like what Connor is saying, because you can say, if you were to say, to stress what is livability, you can say it's a place where you haven't designed for an organization, but you have designed for a community. You don't have opening hours, but you talk about openness. So it doesn't really matter whether you're working or it creates an added value beyond the functional needs somehow.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I just would like to maybe move on a little bit and just maybe to come back to the climate change aspect of it. And I think we'd all appreciate, particularly with the recent IPCC report, that it can seem overwhelming at times, you know, the scale of the changes that are taking place, about to take place, and indeed what we can do about it. So how do you think we can engage with people and communities to get them to see their role in climate action and feel like they can make a difference? And I might start with Mariana this time.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that is a very hard question. I think we are all trying to figure out how we can actually grasp, all of us, the seriousness of this situation. But again, drawing on the experiences from the pandemic, it showed us then if there is a burning platform, we can act. If, you know, but it also was something that you know, was enforced by our authorities. So I think it's important that we have both the pull and the push, that we engage with people, but that also the seriousness and the room for change is shown in our decision makers, that they understand the seriousness and really also support measures and will take the hard discussions. But of course we need to have people involved, but it is serious, so we need also some decision makers making hard decisions. There was a Brussels, I just want to quote a former mayor of traffic in Brussels, Pascal Smet. He once said, sometimes you have to make people happy against their will. And that was not arguing against including people in decision making, but sometimes saying there needs to be hard decisions.
That's interesting, Marianne. It reminds me of another quote from a manager I had once said to me. They said, "You'll be thanked tomorrow for what you do today." So sometimes there's actions that's necessary today that may not be appreciated till a later time. And I often think about this disconnect between the need for change and for people wanting, or people understanding that they need to make personal changes themselves. So I want change, but I don't want to change. And I think that's a real challenge for us, and that climate change and climate action is supported in the abstract, but when it comes to specifics in certain areas or in certain areas of people's lives, geographically or in their behavior, that's where the challenge comes. And I think sometimes it's because they're not really connected with the problem or see themselves as part of the problem. And because of that, they're not necessarily seeing themselves as part of the solution. So I do see there's a whole piece around the engagement there. Sarah, have you any thoughts on that?
Yes, well, I suppose fundamentally, I think that I suppose a climate action plan is a community plan, or a well-being plan for the community. So it may be how we communicate and engage. It may be it's very, as you said, overwhelming and hard to grasp climate action. But in fact, you know, what one is doing to help and improve life in the community is actually we're coming to the same destination, where we have the same goals as climate action. So I think they're fundamental parts of each other. So I think we need to see climate action and community action as the same thing, and that may help us engage more appropriately with the community to achieve those larger goals.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, everyone. Thanks for that, Sarah and Mariana. And if you don't mind, Jakob and Connor, we might just move on to the next question, and we might stop at that because I'm conscious people have other meetings and maybe indeed another event they're going to. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, right? Hope you're ready for this. Could you give us, each of you, as we go around, 2 actions that you could implement that are quick and impactful and that could benefit both livability and make the place more climate resilient? And maybe I'll start with Jakob this time.
So you're saying 2 actions that will change the livability and the climate?
Yeah, that might serve 2 purposes and something that you could do relatively quickly. I know we all have term plans, but what could maybe a city do if you were advising them what they could do in the next 6 months or a year? What could be quick, impactful that could benefit both of those areas?
I mean, the list will be very long, so it's really to get the priorities right.
You only need 2 of them, Jakob. You only need 2 of them.
Yeah. But you can say there's 2 key players when we talk about the, I mean, to make the decarbonization work. That's transport and building buildings. So get out of your car and your buses, get onto the bicycle, and when you build cleverly and think about your footprint. And I think we cannot do it as us here. We cannot do it, and we need to get the mayors, the decisions maker, because we need to change legislations and codes and things like that. Otherwise, we cannot make it work. So traffic and building, the building industry.
Okay, well, you got the advantage by going first, Jakob, so the others will have to come up with different things. So Connor, what's your thoughts on that?
I thought we were doing well until you threw this one out, Robert. I suppose the idea that change is bad, and that if we as a local authority could give people confidence that to take a chance with us and that we would be there to help if things didn't go well, that's something I think over in a short time frame that I think there's trying to bridge the gap between what the perception that people have of a local authority and what we actually do is quite wide. And if we were able to bridge that gap and work closer with the communities in the short term, we could affect real change. And like I'm seeing a lot of it now, where communities are coming forward to us asking us for change. They want modal filters, they want car-free streets, they want school zones, and that change is happening. And maybe the second thing then would be probably to listen more to the kids. I mean, they're being taught very well in school how to be sustainable and green, and in a lot of cases it's the parents that are holding them back. And even things like yes days, mobility yes days, where if they want to walk, cycle or scoot, that the parents facilitate it rather than automatically saying no, might be 2 things to try. And I think I've managed. Robert's frozen, Sarah, so I'm going to put you on the spot now next.
Sure. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Definitely, we need to listen to the kids. I guess to maybe small one, well, maybe not that small, but Marianne showed a lot of images earlier of, I suppose, biodiversity or greening of cities, and I think I think that's the next step for Ireland. That we need to look at our existing street network, our existing public spaces, and think of how we can increase the biodiversity of those. I think that's a critical one. And probably demand management, that's a very maybe big term, a hard term, but we've seen the impact of, say, working from home has had on I suppose the transport system. So I think there's a lot to be said for how we we manage how many people are traveling where and when. Even things like you know, time-based street closures and things like summer streets, like they're doing in Dunleary at the moment, or summer Sundays, that kind of thing, I think has a big potential as well.
Okay.
Pass you on to maybe Mariana.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm here again. Sorry, my connection just failed. Mariana, if you wouldn't mind just going ahead there.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult question, so I'll try and keep it very simple. I'll give the same answer I gave before the pandemic, and hopefully it will be possible again now after. Take decision makers to a trip to either Amsterdam or Copenhagen and have them experience themselves what it's like to be in a city where cycling, for instance, that's what I'm talking about, is part of everyday life. We've seen it with mayors of New York and Chicago coming to Copenhagen and then going back and starting implementing because they saw that it works.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks for that. I would tend to agree with that last one. I know I went 3 years ago on a cycling study tour to Netherlands. Wasn't Denmark, unfortunately, but it was still a country where, you know, cycling is very much established. It had an impact on me, and there was a group of councillors who came along from Laoghaire-Rathdown as well, and I'd imagine that it impacted on them as also. And I think it would be a very wise investment to send our elected representatives and policymakers and decision makers over on these study tours, and it wouldn't be a bad junket with it to go over to Denmark for a few days, enjoy the nice food, public realm and all
Very
that.
welcome.
So, I'm conscious of the time, and look, I just like to finish up at this point, and I'd like to thank Connor, Mariana, Sarah and Jakob for coming here, giving up your time and giving us your thoughts and experience. And I think it was a really interesting discussion, and I was fascinated beforehand to see how that interaction would work, because climate action is about the local and the global. So having these perspectives in the same space was really interesting. So look, and I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who attended and for submitting your questions, and I hope you enjoyed it. We will be making this webinar available on our website, so you'll be able to pick it up later or refer it on to friends or who may not have been able to see it. So look, thank you everybody, and I think at that point we'll just wrap up. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks everybody.